I'm alive. I shouldn't be.
He should not be alive. This is unfucking believable.
From the heart of trucker America, my boy Reed Coverdale, host of The Naturalist, Capitalist.
This is what government does. It sucks.
If you think you're going to win people over by stating commonplaces, you're just selling the other part.
It is about dictating every transaction that you have for the rest of your life.
Mr. Potato Head.
Coverdale is the guy to be president of the United States.
You intimidated me with your perfect 70 porn stat.
That was the beginning of my problem.
He died doing what he loved, chasing a minor.
But I'll put a 50 cal attached to my Suburban.
Libertarians need to get out of New York.
The gulag is going to be in your house.
This guy's a fucking murderer. He deserves to be in a
Gotta get him out
dungeon.
of that truck at night and get him into the White House.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching another episode of The Naturalist Capitalist. For anyone who's been paying close attention tonight, I moved the time of this live stream twice. First, because I was still driving, and then I got to the truck stop, tried to do it out in the truck, and just couldn't get the hotspot to get a good enough connection. And so now I'm in a motel room in the Columbia River Gorge in Oregon. It's beautiful here. I picked up this enormous loader near Portland that's going back to Salt Lake City. I've been stranded out here a few days. It's been kind of weird. We were sitting on the border of Oregon for, I don't know, like 3 hours the other day waiting for our permit. And then we got close to Portland and they told us the machine wasn't going to be ready until Friday morning, but they had it ready this afternoon. So we went and loaded it up, got back outside of Portland, about 100 miles east, and we're spending the night here. Also, my live stream with Dave Smith that was supposed to happen on Tuesday got postponed to next Tuesday. He had some scheduling conflicts, so that will be happening just next Tuesday instead. And yeah, we're having the Four Horsemen on Sunday, so make sure you tune in for that. But anyway, let's bring my guest on. This guy, he had me on like a year ago, and I was rude enough to, wait this long to have him back on. But at least I'm having him on. He is Matt from The Dad Presents, and he is still terrified of COVID. That's why he doesn't want to catch it from me through the microphone. So he is really taking social distancing seriously. How you doing tonight, man?
I am good. I'm glad to be on the show. Thank you so much, Reed. Yeah, well, I mean, we got the BA Baracus variant, and I want to make sure all your viewers know that I care. I want them to see my virtue, so I put on the mask, make sure we don't infect each other. So that's how it is. But man, I'm happy to be here. I'm kidding. I'm gonna take this off. That's ridiculous. God damn it. I hate these things. My kids had to wear them for 2 years. They just stopped only like a month ago, right? And California's talking already like they might bring them back because of this new variant, which has me pretty freaking livid.
Yeah, so you live in Los Angeles area, which is insane in my opinion. Like, I mean, it's funny. I just drove there, a few weeks ago to near Oxnard, picked up a bulldozer at the port, drove it back. It's absolutely beautiful. I love the landscape, love most of the weather, but I don't know. Like, I don't think I could do it, man. I've actually literally never lived in a blue state. So a lot of people know how much I hate conservatives. It's probably because I've had to deal with their bullshit my whole life. I've never lived in like I've lived in Colorado. That was the closest I've lived to a blue state, but I've never lived in like Los Angeles or New York City or anywhere like that.
I totally feel you on that. I'm with you 100% on that, but I come from Pennsylvania, and then I spent about 3 years bouncing all over the country. I lived in about 22 states. I was a physical therapist, and what I would do is I would call up hospitals all over the country and find a hospital who had a pregnant therapist, and I'd do like a short-term contract for like 3-4 months, maybe 6 months. I did that for 3 or 4 years, 22 states. That brought me out to California. And I was like, this is the best spot, for a young man, 24, we're talking 20 years ago. There's nothing better than California, the beach, the weather, the women, but it sucks now. You're right. It sucks. Like, I never thought a state government could have a big impact on my life Like you never really paid attention to local politics. I just didn't pay attention. You're always paying attention to national politics, but local politics just weren't that interesting. And then COVID happened, and you're like, fuck, the governor of your state really matters. Like my kids didn't go to school for a year. So we started talking to, I'm going to forget his name right now, but another libertarian, he does a podcast about traveling. He's in Panama, and he started advising us, and we got hooked up. We went down to Panama. We got our visas. So we have an exit plan to maybe move to Panama. We bought a house in Florida. We might move there. But it's tough leaving this place because you still got the weather. I'm married, but you still got the pretty babies on the beach. And my kids, you know, they're 9 and 12. They got a whole life now. Like to convince them to pick up and go in the name of liberty, right? It's hard to convince that to a child. Like you should leave this place because in a decade you might be a fucking slave, or you might not be able to afford to live here. We should maybe go now. It's hard to make that argument to a 9-year-old.
Yeah. Well, I got to admit, I've been to all 50 states, most of them many times. And as far as geography goes, California wins. I mean, because it has everything.
Yeah.
You know, it's got mountains, forests,
Yep.
ocean, desert, whatever. I mean,
literally everything.
I remember it just kind of blew my mind because I had this preconceived idea of what it was before I ever visited it. And then I did a 2-week tour through the whole state. I went up the entire Pacific Coast Highway, Route 1, and then 101 up near the top. That just that blew my mind, you know, going through Big Sur, going over the Golden Gate Bridge, up into the Redwoods. And then I looped back down and I went through Kings Canyon, Sequoia, Yosemite, Death Valley, like all those national parks. And yeah, I mean, anyone who can't understand why someone would want to live there has not seen enough of the state. They've just like driven through Pasadena or something and been like, wow, this sucks. And then never, you know, turned around.
What most people's impression of California before they get here is Hollywood. And then when people visit from out of town, the first thing they always want to do is go see that shitty Walk of Fame. And I tell visitors every time, like, don't go to Hollywood. You're going to regret it. You're going to spend 2 hours getting there because there's always rush hour. And then you're going to spend 15 minutes looking at fucking cement feet. You're going to be miserable. Then you're going to have a 2-hour drive home. Like California has so much to offer with the beaches, the mountains. Like if you love the outdoors, it's incredible. So it breaks my heart that like when I came here, it was for a job for 4 months. And I was like, well, this is paradise. I'm going to stay. And it breaks my heart now that we're probably gonna leave. Like I would say the only places I've been in the entire world that are more beautiful here in America is Alaska. Alaska is just absolutely stunning, but you can't live in Alaska. You know, I'm not a polar bear. Like you can't live there. You know what I mean? Like you can, but you're gonna get 6 months of darkness. Nobody wants that. And then like Thailand, and I'm not gonna move to Thailand. So it breaks my heart that we might have to leave this place, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's nice to have another libertarian on the show who's traveled a lot, because it seems like a lot of libertarians aren't way into that. Like a lot, I mean, some of them who are doing speaking tours or whatever have been a lot of places, but a lot of people who like to keep to themselves, they don't tend to get out and about much and see much of the world. But it's actually what kind of turned me into a libertarian was traveling, because I had all these preconceived ideas about what everything was before I went there, California being a great example. And then when you go experience it and realize you were wrong, then you start wondering, okay, what else have I just assumed that I don't know anything about? So I started looking more deeply into like foreign policy and the war on drugs and just all these different issues. And then immigration was a big one for me, because I used to be like a hard line, deport all the illegals, build a wall, you know. And then I didn't even realize like what those words meant. And then you start working with immigrants in Arizona and Colorado, and you get to know this guy who has a family, an American wife, kids who go to school, and he's been here, you know, 24 years, but he's technically illegal because of the way he crossed the border 24 years ago, even though he pays taxes and has a job. So everything's just like way more complicated than the Republicans and Democrats want you to look at things.
Yeah.
And when you like get out and meet a ton of different people and just have your mind open to all these different ideas, for me, it's one of the things that really helped me turn that page in my life. I don't know if there's any
no,
you can relate to
absolutely.
that.
I came from a family that's very conservative, Catholic, very conservative, and naturally, like a lot of kids do, like I think most libertarians have a little bit of rebellion in them. So I naturally rebelled against that, but I went in the opposite direction. I went to college. I became very liberal. But my idea of what a liberal was at that time is different than what it is now. It was, anti-war. That used to be a liberal thing, anti-war. Ending the drug wars. That was a liberal thing. So that's how I identified. And then the 2001 wars happened, and I dug in more to that idea that I was a liberal because those were the only people I saw resisting these horrible wars. And I'm older than you. I was, a young man at that time. Remember being very much against it, and I remember being called anti-American for asking the kind of questions that like guys like Bill Maher were asking on TV, like, well, why did they attack us, and were they really cowards and stuff like that. And that really turned me off to conservatives, and I started getting very angry with conservatives. And then Obama came into office, and I was like, well, okay, we're going to start going in the right direction. But none of that happened at all. And that's when Ron Paul came on the scene. And this guy was now talking like what I thought a liberal was, even though he was from the Republican Party. He was anti-war. He was anti-drug war. He was all the things that I believed in. And I was like, well, I guess I'm this thing. I guess I'm not either of those other two things. I guess I'm this thing. Let's roll with that. And I've been on that path ever since. I saw you just had Ron on your show. It was an awesome episode. I had the honor of having him on about a month ago. And I mean, never, I don't know about you, but never in my life did I think I would get to sit down and talk to a man like that for a half hour. No. It was deeply honoring to me.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, seeing him come on your show is what motivated me to like, okay, now's the time. If he went on his show, maybe he'll go on my show too, and I had Daniel McAdams like right before Ron, and I was setting that up. I was setting up the date with Danny McAdams when I saw you announce Ron Paul's coming on my show. And I was like, whoa, that's so cool. Maybe because I didn't even know he was doing shows. I thought he was like occasionally going on like Kitco to talk about gold or something or whatever. But I didn't think he was like doing podcasts anymore. And so then I saw you say he was coming on, and I was like, all right, now's the time, now or never, like who knows. But totally, man, like that was in a lot of ways, that's a pinnacle, that'll never be surpassed. I mean, it doesn't mean the show's over or anything, but in some ways, that is the highest I'll ever get. Like
man, you got a long way to go. That's a launching point for you. I've been keeping my eye on you. I saw you on Kennedy a couple months ago. I mean, your star's just starting to shine. You're going to be just fine. But I know what you mean. It was a wonderful, wonderful honor. And the thing. What struck me is I forget how old he is, but he's older than Biden by a substantial amount, and he's still incredibly
87 this year.
87. So, wow. Yeah. Another guy I had on was G. Edward Griffin, who's 90. He wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island. Are you familiar with that book? Yep. Both of these men are incredibly sharp, which blew me away. It humbled me because I'm not nearly as sharp as them. And it inspired me because one of the things I do fear, I'm getting close to 50. Like, I don't have many fears, but I fear aging. I fear getting old. I fear dying. Like, since growing up, I grew up with religion. I know you're an atheist. I grew up with religion. And
I grew up with religion too, though. So don't worry. I get it.
Okay. And sometime in my 20s, I decided I didn't believe anymore. I don't not believe, but I don't believe. So when you go from believing in God and believing your whole life is, you're on this pathway, you're going to die, you're going to go to heaven, to now I don't believe that, it's a little bit scary. At least for me, it's a little bit scary. So when I see guys like Ron Paul and G. Edward Griffin, nearly 90 years old, just killing it, gives me a little fresh air, lets me breathe a little bit. And both of those guys kill it on the free speech, and that's my main. I've decided with COVID that's my main area of focus. Like, I care about the wars, that's what got me on this path. But there's not a lot a guy like me can do about the wars and international policy. But I feel like free speech is something we can fight for and make a difference. So that's where I'm at with it all.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about your show, why you started doing it, and then I want to get into the censorship that you've dealt with on a pretty large level a little bit later. But what was the purpose of your show? What specific venue did you want to go down, and what particular things did you want to cover? Was it free speech from the beginning? Is that kind of what you really set out to get after?
I fell into this by accident. I was a writer. I'm a businessman, but I would write in my free time. And I wrote a novel maybe 12 years ago, got it published. It sold about 20,000 copies. It's called Broken. Then I got married, got my wife pregnant. And at that time in my life, I was a party guy. I was what you would call what they call these days a fuck boy, right? I was one of those. And I fell in love. I got married. We're having a kid. And it was a lot at once. And I wrote a memoir, a comedy memoir about transitioning from being a party dad or a party guy to a dad. It was called Daddy versus the Suck Monster. And that one sold really well. So from that, I started this Facebook page. So this is like maybe 2015. I start the Facebook page. It's called The Dad Presents. Quickly got about 100,000 followers. And it was all just like dad jokes and dad stuff. And then when Donald Trump was nominated, 2016, I started making little political comments, not pro Donald Trump, not the other guy, just like, hey, let's settle down here. It seems everybody's getting a little tense about this Trump guy. Like, let's take it easy. Let's take a breath. Let's not react the way we're reacting. And the dynamic shifted after that. And I started losing a lot of the people who were following me for the parenting stuff. Started picking up these new followers. And then from there, I started to do a podcast in 2018 with one of my best friends. He's no longer part of the show anymore. And we were still doing the parenting stuff. And then the lockdowns came. And then it was still a parenting show with me and my buddy. But the lockdowns here in California, our kids were sent home from school. And within a month, it became very apparent to me that this was fucking stupid. And you're ruining my kids' lives and my future. I would go out in the living room and I would watch them on Zoom school. And it was hot garbage. And that lasted till the end of the year. And then they picked up with it the next year. It lasted for a full year here. So he's trying to do this parenting show. And I'm constantly ranting about liberty. And then I'm getting us banned on YouTube here and there. So he left the show. And then that's what the show became. So around the time COVID started, we full transitioned from this is a parenting show, The Dad Presents, to now this is The Dad Presents, all about liberty. It just happened. I felt like it had to happen. I feel like if my kids don't have any freedom, liberty is a parenting thing, right? If they can't go to school, and it also changed my opinions on schools, by the way, because I used to be a believer in the public school system because my mom, my dad, my sister, they're all teachers in the public school system. But when that all happened, and I saw how much control they had over my kids and they could end it at any time. And then I could also see the curriculum because they're in my living room and the curriculum's fucking bullshit. Well, that just pushed me even more into that liberty arena. Like, give me back my $14,000. I'll educate them myself type of deal.
Yeah, my dad's a public school teacher too. And he and my mom decided to homeschool all 5 of us kids until we went to high school. Then we went public school. But actually, my older sister, she didn't even go to high school. She was home. She doesn't even have a high school diploma. She has the homeschool certification or whatever that's called. I forget. But when your dad's a high school teacher, and my mom was an elementary school teacher until my older sister was born, and then she quit, and then just my dad taught. Man, and then worked at a restaurant.
Sounds like we have very similar upbringings. Yeah, it's the same with my mom. She had to quit, 5 kids. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's crazy. The religious upbringing too. Yep. You were saying that exactly the same with me, and even the fear of like death, like that being the biggest thing that kept me from ever, going down that road. It's kind of interesting. So when did you start facing a ton of censorship? Because By the way, did you get reinstated on Facebook? Because
It took about almost 50 days and a lawyer, but yeah, we got back on. So okay, so my partner for the original show, I'm not going to say who he is. I mean, people can go back and listen to early episodes and easily find it, but he's one of my best friends, but he's a big deal in the Democratic Party in California. I'll just say that. So when I'm going down this liberty path and I'm, fuck Gavin Newsom, this and that, that's not going to work out for us as a show. Like I was putting him in jeopardy. You know what I mean? Like, so he had to leave. He had to do that for himself. But then I started just making, about 2 months into the pandemic, maybe May-ish, I started making just funny little YouTube short videos showing the hypocrisy of the lockdowns versus what's going, you go to Walmart and there's goddamn 1,000 people there. Right. So I can't go to the corner store, but I can go to Walmart. So I started making little videos like that. And I did one where I went to the bank where you had to wear a mask, and I wore a Michael Jackson mask instead of like a mask. I wore a whole head mask, and I put those on YouTube. And the first two didn't get very much. And then the third one got a lot of views, not enough where it would alert anybody of anything, but someone obviously reported it. And then all three videos got taken down and they ended the channel. So my channel used to be The Dad Presents. So this is 2 years ago. They took that channel down. That's why my channel on YouTube now is Super Bad Dad. Had to start a new channel. Haven't been able to get much traction there on YouTube. I get most of my traction on Spotify. YouTube's been slow slogging. Maybe it has something to do with the name. I don't know. But then finally, about 3 months ago, I had on Dr. Pierre Corey. All right. And Dr. Pierre Corey's the head doctor for the FLCCC, frontline COVID, something. Big shot there. He's been on Rogan, and he's a big pusher of the I word. I'm not going to say it because I'm not going to get your channel in trouble, but you know the word. So he talked about that at great length. And then he went into this study that I think everybody knows about now, about this insurance company in Cleveland who came up with data showing the number of people who have died, not COVID related, since Q2 of last year, since the shot came out. And this insurance company is showing that we have unprecedented amount of deaths that are not COVID related. And he's just talking about that. And he went into detail and he made some assumptions based on that. That episode got 30,000 views in one day, which is about 15 times bigger than anything else I'd had on the new channel. 30,000 in a day. Well, that got taken down. And on that same day, Facebook took my page away, which I had since 2015. Twitter took me off. So all of it on the same day, which is strange that it would all happen on the same day. So Facebook permanently banned me. YouTube gave me like a week suspension. Twitter gave me a week suspension. I got a lawyer. We had to spend some money. It took almost 50 days and we got the Facebook page back. But now the interesting thing is, so at the peak, we had 100,000 followers. Now we're down to like 70,000. But still, even with 70,000, anything I would post 2 years ago, you can see on Facebook how many people see your post. Any of my posts would be seen by about 30,000 people. When I post something now, since I've been back, they get seen by less than 100.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that's a coincidence. I can't imagine like all those people just stopped caring. So it angers me, because I worked hard to build that up. But more importantly, it's scary. It's scary to think that these places like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, it's where all the public discourse is now. And they are manipulating it and controlling it. I mean, we saw what happened with Hunter Biden and how that's all worked out. And that's scary to think about. They can steer this country in whatever direction they want because they control the narrative and they're going to determine what gets heard and what does not.
Yeah, it seems they're willing to sacrifice, profit to control the narrative, because when they do a lot of this stuff, it really hurts their numbers. I mean, people left Twitter in droves when they banned Donald Trump. Just multiple instances like that. It doesn't do anything to help them in an economic sense, but they care more about controlling the flow of information than they do about making money, because power is more important than money in their minds. Would you agree with that?
Well, that's blatantly obvious. Yes. And we're going to know that for sure with this Elon Musk thing. I'm sure you're aware Elon Musk made an offer to buy Twitter. It's when he bought, the first 10%, the shares jumped by 30%. And now he's offering to buy the rest for like another, I don't know, like 15 or 20% above that. So if they reject that, which would make all their shareholders a lot of money, clearly they don't care about money. Clearly they have their eyes on something bigger. What is that? It's the same thing. In my opinion, it's the same thing it always is. It's power, right? It's power, it's control. And that's where I think all libertarians end at with their thinking, is they realize that power corrupts, and people who seek power are not good people and should not be allowed to have power. So that's, for me, that's why I believe in liberty, like to strip power away from people, return the power to the individual.
Yeah. So if he is successful in buying Twitter, which I think I saw one of the Saudi shareholders rejected his offer or something. So I don't know how many people are going to go through with it, or like how successful he'll be at buying it. But let's say he is successful at buying Twitter. Do you think it will still devolve into the same mess eventually somehow? Or do you think this will be like a huge win and he'll really be dedicated to bringing back free speech? Or do you think it's going to turn into like Parler or like a right-wing echo chamber? Or do you think he's really just going to try to nuke all the ridiculous rules that are in there now?
Right. There's really no way to know. I mean, it can't get worse. I know it can't get worse. And just the fact that it's happening is amazing. I mean, look, the only way really to have a totally we saw with Gab what happened, right? Everybody got excited about Gab, thought Gab was going to be a free speech platform, or not Gab, Getter was not a free speech platform at all. It was another right-wing thing. The only way
I was a pioneer in that frontier, by that way.
I do remember. Yes. I remember your posts on there, and yeah, they went after you pretty quick. The only way you're actually going to get a free speech platform is through decentralization, through some kind of new digital technology, the blockchain. That's the only way it's going to happen. I believe there was a guy on Joe Rogan a month or two ago. He has one called Minds. Have you heard of Minds? Okay, so yeah, that's decentralized. That should be a free speech platform. What will happen with Twitter if Elon gets it? I don't know. I'd like to hope he is a man of his word, a man who really believes in free speech, but he's a fucking greedy billionaire. So who knows? Who knows what he's going to do with it? I don't have faith he will be who he says he will be, but I'm excited that it's part of the conversation and could be happening.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that a free speech platform would be one where you can set your own filters, which Twitter has that capability. Like if you don't want to see any pornographic content or certain words, you can edit all of that yourself. So this idea that we need regulations to keep people from posting sensitive content, I think it's just stupid. Like if you don't want to see it, you should be able to make it so you can't see it, whatever it is, whether if it's you don't want to see violence or sexually explicit material or certain political opinions, whatever, like that's fine, but you should just take the time to do your own due diligence and make it so you don't see any of that stuff, so that other people don't have to work around your inability to hear people that will say things or post things that you find offensive. It seems like it should be that way.
Yeah. I think you're saying that you're a grown up and you can decide what you can see and what you can't. And you're right. Jack, the last CEO of Twitter, after he got off Twitter, after he stopped being the CEO, he's been, he's posting libertarian books and whatnot. And he said that there was a way for Twitter. He wanted to have two Twitters, one that was completely unregulated, where it would do exactly what you say, and then like the watered down version of Twitter that we have now. But they wouldn't go for that. That shows you they're not interested in making money. They're not interested in free speech. They're interested in controlling the narrative. And we've seen in the last, I would say the last 3 elections probably, and definitely the last 2, how important Twitter is to elections. Like it swayed probably the last 3 elections. Obama was, the first to it. He jumped on that. And who was he against in 2008? Was it Romney or McCain?
McCain. Yeah.
McCain didn't know what the fuck he was doing. And Obama's out there on social media, and that's why he won. And then Trump in 2016, I mean, that was his whole thing. If there was no Twitter, he wouldn't have stood a chance. So the value of Twitter, everybody can see it. You can control society by controlling the narrative on Twitter. If we could get something like Minds, or if Twitter could become decentralized, it could reshape society. Otherwise, there's no pathway to freedom.
I was thinking how sad it is that Twitter has become how bad it is, because, I can go on Gab and like David Duke will be on there or something, like some person who would never be allowed on Twitter. And I can go on Getter and find, like Alex Jones or whatever. But like when Twitter had everybody, like literally David Duke and Milo Yiannopoulos and Alex Jones and like everybody, along with Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And I mean, it's just like, it's such a magnificent idea that you can say something that any of these people could come across. Like you could crack a joke on some thread that Alex Jones starts, and then you can go tell Nancy Pelosi to go fuck herself. Like the fact that that doesn't exist anymore is just really sad, that you have to like jump platform to platform and you don't just see all these crossovers anymore, is kind of a tragedy. Like there won't ever be another platform, or maybe there will be, but it doesn't seem like there will ever be another platform like Twitter was in 2014. It just seems like it's just becoming more and more compartmentalized, and that overlap and people taking shots at each other from a place where you could kind of just say whatever you want. Like that's just kind of a thing of the past at this point.
Yeah, it was the Wild West for a minute, and it was pretty great, and it was a lot of fun. And now it's just a cesspool of propaganda and war propaganda. Like everybody's got their fucking Ukrainian flag. And look, my family is my grandmother's Ukrainian. Like my people are from there, but the war propaganda is just so gross. And maybe it wouldn't seem as gross to me if I didn't just live through the last 20 years of American history and see it all before. But it's to me, it's just so blatantly obvious. And it's sad to me that most people don't recognize it, because especially people my age who were adults in 2001, who saw the lies of the Iraq war, who saw everything we've lived through since then, they're buying it. And out here in California, almost everybody's buying it. And it breaks my heart a little bit.
Yeah.
And I know you've been a big warrior against that kind of stuff, and we appreciate guys like you, because you know your shit and you tell people, and that's courageous too, because in the way that I was getting banned for COVID stuff constantly, when you say things they don't want you to hear, you're putting your neck on the line, and they're probably you haven't been banned anywhere yet, but they're coming for you soon. That would be my prediction.
I did lose 20,000 followers on Twitter, but I was technically violating the Twitter rules. It was something incredibly stupid, but technically they were right. It wasn't. If I get banned next time, I want it to be for something, somewhat important. That was just like, it was ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, I personally, we were talking earlier about the, growing up as conservatives, because I did too. I remember being suckered for a lot of things when I was, in middle school and high school, and really buying into a lot of propaganda and obvious bullshit. And it pisses me off to think back to that time and realize that I fell for all of it. And I never was a socialist or a Democrat or a progressive or whatever. So that like cringe crap doesn't make me as angry because I don't see it in, I don't see any of it in myself. So like when I look back at the way I used to be, um, I have more of a reaction to it now, and war propaganda is a big part of that. So I think that's why I'm so outspoken on that
I would
issue, because
I
it's
would say
something
that's
that I
definitely
just
why.
fell for.
I
Yeah,
would say that's definitely a big reason. Now you're talking about parenting stuff. Like as parents, the main job is not to fuck up your kids. Like we're all fucked up. No parent has done this job perfectly. Like everybody has scars from their childhood, and those scars affect you for the rest of your life. Like I was very, very bitter about religion in my 20s when I was coming out of it. Very bitter, very resentful. I spent 10 years where I just did every drug, had all the sex because that was all repressed when I was young. I was a good little, I was an altar boy. I was a good little altar boy. And I felt like I got robbed out of my childhood and I'm going to make up for lost time now. And I fucking went for it, man. And I did a pretty good job. So, but I had good parents. I had really solid parents. My point is that everybody comes out of childhood a little bit fucked up. And those tiny scars that we have impact us for a very long time, if not the rest of our life. So that's something we're constantly talking about on our show, is like the main thing you want to do for your child is you want to be there, you want to love them, you want to be present, you want to provide for them, and you just want to minimize the damage you do to them, because you're going to accept you're going to do some damage. How you feel about war, I would say without question, has something to do with your childhood. I think that's a great observation that you come to that conclusion without being a parent, because I didn't realize these things until I was a parent, then looking back on it.
Yeah, I'm going to try to share the screen here. What the heck? Let's see. Win Chrome tab. There it is. So my parents were actually anti-war. This is, I think that's showing up. Yeah. So my dad found this clip from 2003. This is me right here, the guy in the green jacket and everything. So I'm
How old are you there?
This is, I think, March of 2003. So I'm like I'm 8, almost 9. But I'm just gonna play this. So that says this is in Sunapee, New Hampshire. So Baghdad is someone's Sunapee. That's what that means. So it's someone's hometown. This is my older sister here in the pink jacket. So, and then that sign behind there says "Blood is thicker than oil." There were we were all holding signs. That's my younger brother right there in the red.
Wow.
That's my younger sister in the pink over there. But he just found this and sent it to me.
Now wait a minute. So. You said your parents were very conservative, yet were conservative, yet they saw from pretty early on that these wars were wrong. So they weren't buying it hook, line, and sinker.
No, and they weren't like paleo conservatives, and they certainly weren't libertarians. They were like evangelical, like in every way except for the war. They were like George W. Bush.
Yeah, but isn't that interesting? Because you say they weren't evangelical. Like when we do think of
they were evangelical.
Okay, I'm sorry. When we think of the religious people and that time frame, most of them were pro-war, which is a very confusing thing, because when you understand what Jesus is all about, it's not war. So that was one of the first things that got me turned off to religion. Like those two things didn't jive for me. Like religion is about loving your neighbor, turning the other cheek. It's not about fucking dropping bombs on churches in Baghdad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird.
The no blood for oil sign. That's funny. I remember those, man. That was the rallying cry.
Yeah, it's funny. My parents were like very thoughtful, and they would, especially my dad, he would let me ask any questions I had about religion or politics or whatever. And then, as I obviously showed there, they were very against the grain on war. To them, thou shalt not kill meant the death penalty, abortion, and war. Like those are all bad, which, that kind of makes sense.
Sounds
Thou
about
shalt
right to
not
me.
kill means
Yeah.
thou shalt not kill. And
Imagine that.
but the institutions they were sending us to were just horrible. Like we went to summer camp and vacation Bible school, and our church when we do Sunday school with other people. I mean, like they were all completely pro-war. They were very Zionist, very pro-Israel, and they were also extremely dogmatic religiously. Like there was no room for any questioning of anything. Like when I went to summer camp, if I would say like, wait, so why do Catholics go to hell? They'd be like, we are going to pray that you have more understanding and you stop asking those questions. Like, oh, okay, whatever, So like I have a lot of bitterness from my childhood, from a lot of propaganda I was told, but my parents, other than sending me to these places, they don't really share a lot of that responsibility because they were very open-minded and always willing to talk about anything. So I was lucky. I had good parents like you.
Interesting.
You did.
Sounds like maybe they didn't have a ton of idea that what was going on at these places. Another thing that struck me about religion, another one that really got me was the gay thing. Because Catholics are super homophobic. Maybe not anymore, but 20 years ago they were super homophobic. And for me, I'm like, I was never homophobic. I didn't get that. Like they're just, this guy's not going to he's not going to fuck me if I don't want to fuck him. Like, what's there to be afraid of? I didn't understand how, okay, if we believe God created us, God made this guy want to touch butts. Well, how then is he going to send him to hell for that? Right. So, but then when you ask those questions, because I would ask the priest questions like that, they shush you. They don't want much like the state doesn't want you asking question. The priest doesn't want you asking questions.
Yeah, for sure. Very similar. So this is a good question for you. There's a lot of hubbub around the transgender issue right now. And so the argument is like they're not old enough to be able to decide this, for themselves. And then the counter argument is like, well, they're not old enough to decide anything for themselves. You're brainwashing them if you teach them about religion, about whatever. And I think the counter argument's bullshit. Like, obviously, you have to some extent brainwash your children because, they're not going to understand anything, but you have to give them a foundation upon which to stand. Like that's what my parents did for me. They were very open-minded and willing to let me ask questions about anything, but they were very firm. Like, you are not going to do this and you are going to do this while you live in this house. When you leave this house, you can make your own decisions, but as long as you're here, this is the way you're going to live. And looking back, I don't regret being brought up that way. I mean, I think kids who are brought up just being allowed to do whatever they want and not being disciplined in any way, I think they end up being little demons, usually, and they're not prepared for life. They don't have a work ethic. They don't value respect or hard work or, perseverance or integrity. Like, it just doesn't matter to them. So even though there's some bullshit that I was brought up with that I feel like I left behind, overall, I'm glad I was brought up the way I was. But any thoughts on that?
Oh man, I got all kinds of thoughts on that. I was brought up in a very strict home, and that made me rebel. So I always said, I'm not going to have a strict home. Now, what's your definition of strict? Like not being allowed to do shit. I couldn't go to parties. I couldn't have a good time. Wasn't allowed to date. So I decided that's not the kind of dad I'm going to be.
Were you allowed to trick or treat on Halloween?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. I grew up in a stricter house than you.
Wow. You can trick or treat. Wow.
No. Wow. It's the devil's holiday. We weren't allowed to partake,
oh yeah. So. Yeah. Wow. Interesting. So what we did with our kids, and it's working, I think we have two pretty great kids, is I've taught them everything I can teach them, but I teach them in a way that they're allowed to ask questions, and I just give them the information. Of course you're going to influence your kids. You can't not, but I try just to give them the information and let them come to their own conclusions. And we have a rule in our house that the only real crime in this house is lying. You cannot lie to mom and dad. And if you break that, because once you lie to us, we can't trust you. If we can't trust you, then you can't do shit. So I was teaching my kid at the age of 4. Now, people think this is crazy. At the age of 4, I was teaching him about sexuality, gender stuff. I taught him all that because I knew we're in California. He's going to hear it. I learned how babies are made from my buddy Jamie DeFinis in 7th grade. And what he told me is you put your penis in a girl's butt. And that's how I thought babies were made until about 9th grade. Right. So that's fucked up. I didn't want that for my kids. So I taught them. And my kid has always been very advanced in that stuff. My wife was a little against it because she thought you're like taking away their innocence, taking away their childhood. But it didn't. They had tremendous childhoods. Yes, you have to discipline. You absolutely have to discipline. But disciplining them when they fuck up is not the same as not letting them do things. I give them rope. I let them make mistakes. And if they make a mistake that was because of something they should not have done, then I punish them. Now, you asked about the trans stuff. I've had a couple trans people on the show. That subject fascinates the shit out of me. I'm fascinated by it. I don't know why, but I find it to be incredibly fascinating. And out here, it's wild. So my son, he's 12, and he has a little girlfriend. His girlfriend is how does she describe herself? Non-binary bisexual, which is bullshit. She's 12. She's a virgin. She's not any kind of sexual. She's a 12-year-old girl, right? But we met her. She's perfectly normal. But here's what you have going on in the schools out here, and this is not an exaggeration. I asked him, like, well, why don't you just get a girl who's like straight girl, like you're a straight boy, get a straight girl. And he said, Dad, every single girl in my school except 5 identifies as a lesbian or non-binary. So it's become so that we're talking about a school with 300 girls. So he said all of them that he knows, except for 5, identify that way. It's become the new trend. It's become trendy out here. And the reason it's trendy is it's impossible for 285, 300 girls to be lesbian or non-binary. And also I asked him, well, are all your buddies gay and non-binary? He's like, no, I don't know any guys like that. There's like 1 in the school. So it's become like the hip trend for the girls, but it's still the icky thing for the boys, like it was when we were growing up. So that's another reason I wanted to get ahead of it there. I wanted to teach him before he falls into some of the traps that are going on out here.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a balance, like you're saying. Like there are some things my parents did that all of us give them shit about. And it's funny, after enough time goes by, they'll start saying like, no, we didn't do that. It's like, yeah, you did. Like I remember,
that's infuriating.
Oh yeah. And it's funny, like seeing how the standards slid from my older sister and I to our younger sister, because my younger sister's 6 years younger than me, and we're all 2 years apart, all 5 of us. And so my older sister and I, we were brought up very similarly as far as strictness goes. And then for my younger brother, it got a little bit lighter. And then my other younger brother, it was even lighter. And then my youngest sister, by the time she graduated, it was like, wow, you guys have just let things fly. I remember, I think it was 15, and my dad was like, Reed, you're getting a little too like obsessed with like World War II and death and stuff. Like it's not war is not a good thing. You need to watch Saving Private Ryan with me, because I had only seen.
Oh man, you were that kid.
Dude. Like I loved World War II. I was just obsessed with it, and I thought it was just the coolest thing ever. And my dad was like, Reed, war is not cool. It sucks. So he watched Saving Private Ryan with me, and it just shocked me. And I remember I cried for like half an hour after watching it. By the time my sister was 14, she was watching it alone in the basement, and it like didn't phase her at all. It was just like, oh yeah, there's a movie. I mean, it just shows like how extreme the shift was through the different kids or whatever. I remember I'm not exaggerating. Like we would get our mouths washed out with soap if we called each other stupid when we were younger. Like that was one of the words we weren't allowed to say. As I said earlier, we didn't do trick-or-treating because Halloween was, worshiping the devil or whatever. And we weren't allowed to read Harry Potter books. We didn't have any video games until my younger siblings started playing them. But yeah, I've never been trick-or-treating my whole life. Never went.
Wow, you got to do it. I mean, you're kind of a walking costume. You could go out like that. Like,
yeah,
you could
the
be the Reed
trucker
Coverdale
thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you're like like a human costume. It's great. I
So
feel a little bit like I've lived your life. You have 5 kids. We were in a family of 5. I was the oldest. You were the second oldest, and that was a joke we had. Like, I wasn't allowed to watch any rated R movies, and we make the joke that by the time my sister was my age, the only rule was no smoking crack in the kitchen, because they completely
Right.
changed 5
Yeah.
kids down. Speaking of language, I also had my mouth washed out with soap, but that was by my grandmother. The nice.
So how'd she
Ukrainian
do it?
lady.
Was it the soap flakes on the washcloth? Because my dad would
Yes,
wet a
that's exactly
washcloth
it.
and then pour
Yeah.
soap flakes on it and say, stick your tongue out, and then get it right on like the flat part of your tongue where the bitterness really, same thing.
100%. Yep, that's how she did it. That's how
Yeah.
she did it. Strong, crazy Ukrainian woman. Loved her. She was great. But she speaking of language, so stupid was a bad word in your house. That's another one that I had a big problem with, and I decided as a parent, I'm going to be different. Like, words are just fucking sounds you make with your face, right? Like, they're just sounds. So it's not the word that you choose to say, it's the intention. And this is what I teach my kids. So my little 9-year-old walks around the house sometimes and says the F word. Now, we don't let him say that outside the house because he will be judged and he will be treated poorly. But in this house, he might say it. But if he says fuck you to his brother or to me, he's gonna be in a world of hurt. But if he says, Mom, I fucking love you, that's just a word and he's saying a nice thing. You know what I mean? So that's something I tried to change in our household. Like, words are just sounds. I don't care what words you choose. I care about the meaning behind what you're saying.
So let me
that
ask,
comes from the 10 commandments, right? Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. Like,
right.
there's only 10 rules in the whole Bible. And one of the 10 things you're going to go to hell for is saying God's name. It's fucking retarded. Like, that's retarded. I'm sorry. I can't sign up for your religion when you have 10 rules. And one of them is there's a magic word I can't say.
Yeah. I want to ask you, so my dad and mom, they were extremely strict when it came to what we were allowed to watch, what type of movies or we didn't have a television hookup, no cable. We just watched movies. That was it. And then like reruns of old TV
Doesn't
shows.
have cable. Where did you grow up?
In New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire. And was that by choice, or were you guys just
no, by choice. No, it was by choice. But it was a very, very strict socially, but they would let us do anything we wanted as far as like, going out in the woods alone, starting fires in the backyard by ourselves, going shooting when we were older, going, like, once we were old enough to drive, like going 100 miles away from home and doing a 30-mile backpacking trip for a couple days out in the woods. They'd let us, like, we were jumping off of a 30-foot bridge into like 8 feet of water in a river when we were in like early high school. They'd let us go outside when it was below zero when we were children and go play. And they would let us do anything when it came to that. It was basically like, just don't kill yourself and don't hurt each other and just go have fun. And they were just completely hands off with that. And looking back in life, like, I mean, that's why I am so gung-ho now, because I grew up that way. It was like, yeah, just go do it, and so many people are terrified to be that way with anything. Like, they're terrified to try something because they might fail, where I grew out of that at age 5, so so many parents nowadays are so overprotective of their children in that regard. Like, it's almost the opposite of my parents. Like, they let them watch anything they want, and they let them, identify as gender queer or whatever the fuck. But if you want to go swimming without parental guidance, then no, you can't do that. You might die. So I just want, what do you think about that? Are you like really hands off with your kids, or what do you like?
You're absolutely right. I didn't get to do that stuff as a kid because my parents were scared, and parents live in fear. I definitely see that out here. No, we let our kids do some shit. Now it's always a tug of war with the wife because she's got a little anxiety, so it's always a tug of war. But I want them to do that shit. Like, look, you're an interesting dude. You've done a lot of shit. You've had a good life. Like, you live one time. You got to experience things, and your childhood is the best part of your life in a lot of ways. It's the most free, even though you're not free. Your parents are in charge. You have no responsibility. So live, experience, do shit. I didn't get to do shit. And so in my 20s, again, I went crazy. As a result, I have 3 vertebrae fused in my neck, have an artificial joint in my neck. My wrist is fused and they pulled a bone out. I've had a knee surgery. I've had about 15 serious surgeries in my 20s because I became very reckless and wanted to try everything all at the same time. Right. I was, again, rebelling, and I had a lot of injuries. We let our kids do stuff. They're also very well traveled. We've taken them to Panama, Costa Rica, the Philippines. They're half Filipino. They've been all over the place, and we try to instill. They have a good sense of adventure by nature, and we try to really encourage that, because you're right. A lot of parents make this mistake where they sit them down in front of the fucking iPad or the TV. And that's just laziness. You're just being a lazy parent when you do that. Now, don't get me wrong. My kids do that too, but we don't let it get over the top, because some kids they'll sit there all day for 8 hours a day if you let them, and they're just poisoning their head with 30-second TikTok videos, one after another, and their brains are turning to fucking mush. And kids aren't getting on their bikes anymore. You know, we used to get on our bikes, go to our buddy's house, and you'd come home at dark. Kids don't really do that anymore. So we really try to push them to do that, because it's a healthier way to live. It's a better way to learn by doing instead of watching. So yeah, I completely agree with your statement, and I think it's important. And COVID really, really dialed the clock back on this and made it even worse, because parents who were already afraid are more so afraid. Like, we have some of my kids' friends, they have not seen in 2 years, because there was a year where they were homeschooled. And during the year of homeschool, of course, those kids never left their home, did not leave their home. And then they go back to school, and they're back in school, but they still have all these like stupid distancing guidelines. And some kids have elected not to come back, so they still do school by Zoom. So these kids, I'm sorry, but they're fucked up. They're fucked for life. They've been home for 2 years. They've not been interacting socially. They've been not been getting exercise. They've been doing Zoom school, and then they've been looking at TikTok videos. They're fucked. They're in big trouble. And that's one thing that really does bother me about California, because I'm sure it's not like that in most of the country, but it is like that out here. And the really wild thing is that parents, people my age, who should know better, who had normal childhoods, they see this and they have their kids going through it, and they're perfectly fine with it. And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you know, a big part of the reason I named the show The Naturalist Capitalist is because I think capitalism mirrors natural law in a lot of ways. And I'm talking about true capitalism, where it's not socialized losses and privatized gains. It's privatized gains and privatized losses. Like, you let things fail when they're not going to make it. We've created this society where everything needs to be artificially protected and elevated to a status it doesn't belong. Like, if people suck at something, they shouldn't do that job. If you didn't come in first place in the tournament, then you didn't come in, you don't get a trophy. You know, it's like first, second, third. After that, you lost. Get over it. You know, do better next time. We've just completely thrown that out. And I think the lockdowns and COVID was kind of that ideology coming to its final conclusion, where it's like, we can't let anyone die, so we'll just all stay home, and actually, you know, lead to more suffering than we would have if we didn't do that. But it's just this stupid mentality that, you know, people are going to get hurt, people are going to die, people are going to suck at things. I mean, we just need to stop having this idea that we can save everybody and give everybody, that everyone's going to have equitable outcomes. Like, it just doesn't work that way. That's not scientific. That's not natural. So to try to make it that way is just a mistake. And I feel
it's
like
a mistake. It's a mistake. I think it comes from a good place for most people.
Sure.
Most people see someone struggling and they think we should help that person. So I think the intentions are good, but what people don't. Okay, by craft, I'm a physical therapist. I said that. So for 15 years out here, I worked in the ghettos. I was able to build a business that I started for $25. I sold it in 2018, which was perfect timing because I sold it right before the lockdowns. And I made a good amount of money doing this. I was able to build this business because I was going into Compton and Watts and South Central, all the communities where people were afraid to go. I wasn't afraid. They weren't that bad. So I was able to build this business there. And at the time when I started that business was probably about 2008. If you would have asked me, I would have said, I do believe in affirmative action and I do believe in some form of welfare. But after working in those communities for years and years and years, what I saw is that all the people who were getting that stuff, everybody who was getting welfare, everybody who benefited from affirmative action, it was tearing those communities apart. Those communities are filled with homes that have no fathers. Most of the fathers are in prison. And the moms are collecting welfare and the kids are just running around slinging drugs. It's a bad situation. And I don't think it was that way 40 years ago. I think it's a direct reaction or a direct response to government intervening and trying to help if that's what they were actually trying to do. So to your point, you can't try to prop everybody up and you can't try to make everything equitable. And they don't try to do it for everybody. They just try to do it for the super poor and then the super rich, right? They don't try to do it for us. We don't get any of that. But it doesn't work. And the evidence is all you have to do is, since they started all these bullshit policies, is look at what the wealth gap was 50 years ago and look at the wealth gap now. And it's way worse now, right?
Yeah.
The one thing it was supposed to correct is way worse.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny seeing everyone who is always complaining about the wealth gap and the 1% of the 1% having all the wealth.
Is that your Bernie?
Yeah, they fully supported every single bill that increased the wealth gap and increased the wealth of the 1%. It's just like, whatever. But man, thanks for coming on.
Bernie,
go ahead.
Do you think he I used to like him a bit. Do you think he's aware that his policies are like stealing from people and hurting the poor, or do you think he really buys into that kind of stuff?
I have never liked him, and it's not because he's a socialist or he's for gun control or whatever. The reason I have not liked him is because he's a fraud. Like, I don't think he's a sellout. Everyone's calling him a sellout. Like, oh, he's sold out. It's like, well, you can't sell out if you're a fraud. Like, you're just always fake. But I mean, especially this year after, how much he shilled for Biden and this last election, 2020, whatever. So many people were shocked that he did that. And I was like, how can you be shocked after 2016? And then it doesn't even start at 2016. You go back far enough, it starts in the 90s when he voted for the Iraqi Liberation Act. And, when he was running for Congress from Vermont, he had to cut a deal with the Democrats that he would back them up on some of their foreign policy views if they wouldn't run a challenger against him if he ran as an independent. So, this has been around with him forever, and I hate his guts because he's such a liar. He acts like he's this radical socialist, but he always votes corporate, and he's only been against Bush's wars, and he didn't even show up to try to overturn the Patriot Act in 2020 to vote. And so, I just think he's a complete joke. And I like Dennis Kucinich a lot, and he is the same thing that Bernie claims to be. But
Yes.
if you look at his voting record, like he actually did vote against corporate spending, and he actually did vote against war
Mhm.
and voted for civil liberties. And I disagree with Dennis Kucinich on at least a third of what he thinks, but it's like, okay, he's at least consistent and doing what he
Man,
says he's gonna do, you know?
I think you nailed it there. That's the guy. When I did identify as a liberal guy, I voted for Dennis for president 2 times because he was sincere about it. You could believe him. And you're right, Bernie's a freaking fraud. It's
Yeah.
upsetting when you learn that about people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
What about your
I
girl?
was
What about your girl Tulsi? Like, you supported her. You still feel good about her?
I don't regret supporting her. I don't know if I would again in the future. It would have, I mean, because 2020 was weird. I mean, we didn't really have, I mean, the
Understatement.
options were so bad, you know, and she was so obviously better than everyone else. But um, I don't know, like so like when that clip came out of her talking about 9/11 and how it was, or no, sorry, that was a tweet. She made a tweet about 9/11 saying it was because of all these radical Muslims who hate us because we're free or whatever. It was like, oh God, that. And
Right.
then she was on Tucker Carlson's show talking about um, the drone strike in Afghanistan and how drone strikes are better than, like,
Yeah.
anyone
I
who
saw that.
knows.
She even cut Tucker off guard with that one. Like, Tucker seemed to be the anti-war guy in that conversation. I remember that
Yeah.
one. That was surprising.
The thing is, though, like, none of that is surprising if you really know her well, because she talked about that a lot during her campaign. Like, she would say repeatedly, I'm a hawk on terror and a dove on regime change. And there were a few events I was at where she would say, I am not a peacenik. Like, people are trying to make me out to be some anti war hippie. I'm not. I'm just against overthrowing dictators and expecting it to fix things. So, like, that uglier side of her foreign policy, that really isn't anything new. And it's something I've known about as long as I supported her, but it's just so much better than everyone else. Like, even if you still want to bomb Al Qaeda, if you don't want to give them weapons and you don't want to remove dictators in the Middle East and you don't want to support Saudi Arabia, like, it's still way better, you know. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like,
If that's what you want out of a leader, it's pretty slim pickings. Like,
yeah,
your guy's Dave Smith, probably.
yeah,
Right.
he is,
That's
yeah.
our guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, like, if Tulsi somehow ends up becoming the Democrat nominee, like, if Dave's running, like, he's my guy, like, because yeah, he's right on all of it. You know, he realizes the root problems where this came
Mhm.
from. And I'm still trying to get her. She told me over a year ago now she would come on my show. So now that I've had like Ron Paul and Peter
Yeah.
Schiff and some of these bigger names, hopefully I got to start bugging her again. I got her phone number. I should just call her and be like, yo, Tulsi, when are we doing this? But
I would totally stalk her. Yeah.
yeah.
Call her up.
But
I know you got to go, and I know you're supposed to interview me, but I did want to ask one more thing on the
sure.
Dave Smith tip. Dave's amazing. I love the dude. He's so good at communicating a message, right? That's his strength. He can really communicate a message. I think he would wipe the floor in a debate with anybody else that gets put up there. Is there any realistic possibility, in your opinion, that we can get Dave Smith on the national debate stage?
I think so. I mean, I think there was a possibility you could have got Gary Johnson there in 2016, and think of what a dub he was. Like, I mean, he was such a
Yeah.
disaster. So if I mean, it kind of depends on who the two candidates are. Like, if it's DeSantis and some good Democrat, it's going to be like, if it's DeSantis against Tulsi, it's going to be way harder for Dave to get any recognition or make a mark. But if it's like Trump again versus Biden or
Right.
something like that, or Ted Cruz versus Kamala Harris or something horrible like that, then it'll be very easy for him to get a lot of attention and traction. So I think, yeah, if there's two shitty candidates, there's a pretty good possibility he'll end up on the debate stage. And who knows, dude? If that happens, who knows what could happen? I don't think he could win, but who knows? Like, I mean, who knows?
Just to get him up there and
Yeah.
get people to hear that contrast would really make a big difference in this country.
But
All
he
right,
went on Glenn Beck recently,
Oh, he did?
and he's been on Megyn Kelly's show, and like all of them are asking him, "So, man, are you going to run for president?" So when you have people like that wondering, 2 years almost before
That's pretty
it
big,
kicks
yeah.
off, like that matters a lot. So
Sure.
I'm optimistic, man. So tell us where we could follow your show. I've got links to, I think, your Facebook, your Twitter, your YouTube, and your website.
Yes.
Where do you put most of your stuff that people can keep up with?
We're at the Dad Presents on all platforms. Facebook is where we got our start. Most of the people who follow the show listen on Spotify, but we are trying to get the YouTube rolling. But to find it there, it's going to be youtube.com/superbaddad. That's how you find the Dad Presents on YouTube. So check us out, please.
All right, man. Well, I'll see you in Reno.
Absolutely. That's going to be a good time.
But I would like to talk on the show again too. Sorry it took me almost a year. I think when you had me on your show, I was like, "Oh yeah, let's do a show sometime," and you were like, "Yeah, man." And then 11 months went by. So, but let's do it again. I like talking.
You're a busy man, and you're kicking ass out there. I just appreciate you putting me on. Good time.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
All right, Reed.